Imagine a people who terrified Europe for more than 300 years. Men who did not fear death. Black ships emerging from the fog. Villages burning before anyone could even hear a warning. They were the Vikings, a name that made kings pray. And then they just disappeared. No final legendary battle. No great climactic defeat. No dramatic collapse. Just a quiet end to the most feared warriors in history. So, how did the Viking Age really end? And how did a people who, in many ways, never truly lost fall? This is the story of the quiet fall of the world's fiercest warriors. To understand their end, we first have to understand who they truly were. The Vikings were not just the one-dimensional pirates we see in movies. They were a complex civilization of warriors, traders, and unparalleled explorers, born in the harsh, beautiful lands of Scandinavia, what we now call Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Between the 8th and 11th centuries, their influence exploded across the known world. They didn't just raid a few coastlines. They conquered England. They carved out a huge territory in France, which became known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen. They settled the remote, uninhabited islands of Iceland and Greenland. They even reached North America, landing on its shores nearly 500 years before Columbus set sail. Their power didn't come from massive armies or overwhelming numbers. It came from something far more effective: speed. Their legendary longships were marvels of engineering. With a shallow draft, they could navigate both the open ocean and shallow rivers, allowing them to strike deep inland, where no one expected an attack. They could appear without warning, conduct their raid, and be gone before any real defense could be mounted. But their greatest weapon wasn't wood or steel. It was their mindset. The Vikings had an unshakable belief that dying bravely in battle was the most glorious fate a warrior could achieve. It was a one-way ticket to Valhalla, an eternal hole of glory where they would feast and fight alongside the gods. This belief didn't just make them fearless. It made them actively seek out a heroic death. To face a Viking was to face someone who had already accepted their own mortality, and in fact, welcomed it. This combination of advanced naval technology and a warrior culture that glorified death made them seem unstoppable. For centuries, the coastlines of Europe were gripped by a constant fear of the Northmen. But that very strength, that fierce, unyielding identity, carried the seeds of their own downfall. As the centuries passed, the world around the Vikings began to change. Europe, once a fragmented collection of weak kingdoms, started to get its act together. Feudalism created a more organized and hierarchical society. Kings consolidated their power, raising professional armies that were better trained and better equipped. And perhaps, most importantly, stone castles started rising all across the landscape. These were not the simple wooden forts the Vikings had icily burned down before. These were formidable fortresses that could withstand a prolonged siege. Cities learned how to build walls and defend themselves. The element of surprise, the Vikings' greatest advantage, began to fade. Raids that were once easy and highly profitable became costly and dangerous. Viking ships started returning home with fewer treasures and more empty seats at the longhouse table. The risk was no longer worth the reward. The economic model that had fueled the Viking Age for 300 years was slowly but surely breaking down. But the greatest threat, the one that would ultimately dismantle their entire way of life, did not come from foreign swords or stone walls. It came from within Viking society itself. It wasn't a weapon you could see or a battle you could fight, it was Anida. Quietly, without a single great battle, the most powerful transformation began. Viking kings, who were once the leaders of great raids, started to see a different path to power and stability. They began to convert to Christianity. This wasn't always a purely spiritual decision. For many Viking leaders, adopting the religion of their powerful European neighbors was a strategic move. It opened up new trade alliances, gave them legitimacy in the eyes of Christian kings, and offered a model for building a centralized, stable kingdom, complete with taxes, laws, and illiterate administration things. The old pagan ways didn't provide, and with this new faith, everything changed. The old gods, Odin and Thor, who personified war and strength, began to fade from memory. The very idea of Valhalla, the promise of glory through death and battle, lost its power. Young men no longer dreamed of dying heroically on a foreign shore. They started to dream of something else, of living, of farming their own land. of building a family, of ruling a piece of land instead of burning it to the ground. The warrior who once proudly carried an axe now carried a plow. And in that quiet, profound shift of belief, the Viking spirit, the very engine of their age, died not with a bang, but with a whisper. With this internal transformation, the entire purpose of Viking society shifted. Raiding was no longer the primary goal. Stability became the future. The Vikings began to settle down permanently in the lands they had once invaded. They married into the local populations. They adopted new languages, new customs, and new identities. They stopped being outsiders and started becoming part of the fabric of Europe. In England, the descendants of the great heathen army blended into the Anglo-Saxon population, enriching its culture and language. In France, the Vikings who settled in Normandy became the Normans, one of the most powerful and sophisticated dynasties in medieval history. In fact, it was their descendant, William the Conqueror, who would later conquer England in 1066. The irony is staggering. The Vikings' descendants conquered England, but they did it not as pagan raiders, but as French-speaking Christian knights. Even back in Scandinavia, the old ways were replaced. Modern kingdoms Denmark, Norway, and Sweden emerged, with centralized governments, codified laws, and Christian churches. The raiders had become kings. They were ruled by law instead of by the fear they once inspired. The Vikings were never defeated in a single, final, epic battle. They simply faded away, absorbed into the very world they had once sought to conquer and terrorize. And then, in the year 1066, history drew its final, symbolic line in the sand. The last great Viking king, Harald Hardrada of Norway, a man who had fought as a mercenary across the world from Kiju to Constantinople, launched one final, massive invasion of England. He was attempting to claim the English throne, a classic Viking ambition. But at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, his army was met by the well-organized English forces of King Harold. In a brutal, hard-fought battle, Harald Hardrada was killed, and his army was shattered. This defeat is the moment most historians mark as the official, definitive end of the Viking Age. There was no thunder from the gods, no epic legend being sung in the halls of Valhalla. Just silence on a bloody field in northern England. Just a few weeks later, the English king who defeated him would himself be defeated and killed at the Battle of Hastings. By William the Conqueror, descendant of Vikings, the age had come full circle. So, the Vikings didn't disappear because they became weak. They disappeared because the world changed, and more importantly, because they changed with it. They adapted so successfully that their old identity became obsolete. They traded their longships for castles, their axes for crowns, and their religion. And perhaps that is the real, lasting lesson they left behind for us. The greatest empires, the fiercest warriors, the most dominant cultures, they don't always fall to the sword. Sometimes, they just quietly fall when they lose their reason to exist, transforming into something new. The fire of the Vikings didn't burn out. It was simply forged into the heart of modern Europe. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into the past interesting, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories from history. We'll see you in the next one.